I want to think, people have this idea about the unconscious, right? And I feel like, so in pop psych and popular psychology, there's this idea that exists, that it floats around, and it's like the unconscious mind. And it's like that we have this idea of unconscious or non-conscious. Let's see, I'm just gonna do like the quick thing where I look at something here. Yeah, like you can already see, the unconscious mind consists of the processes in which the mind occurs automatically and are not available to introspection, including thought processes, memories, interests, and motivations. So this tends to work out. This is the way people look at it, right? This is the way that a lot of people want to construe the unconscious mind. And of course, it's always like an iceberg. I don't know why people always want to take this as like an iceberg. Like this stuff all sucks.
I want to see your shine spark. All together.
I didn't even know there were vocals to that song. People have this premise that exists of like, let's see, like this one's good. The unconscious mind and the conscious mind and the pre-conscious mind. This stuff is all bullshit. I hate the iceberg meme. Kiramiki vocals are very good. But like, it doesn't work this cleanly. And the one thing that I really dislike about this to begin with, so is that it has this hard line that there is a point where the conscious begins and or the conscious ends and the unconscious begins. And particularly like this kind of stuff, when people look at these kinds of things, like these kinds of frameworks, let's see if I can get this to be, see, this is what really hurts me as a psychologist. Like you have people that use these terms like conscious mind and subconscious mind. And you get shit like this. And then you look at who's putting that out there, and it's like, I'm a YouTuber at Spiritual Awakening. Bitch, I'm a VTuber and also a doctor of social psychology. This is not real. This framework of conscious versus subconscious or unconscious is not fucking real at all. In particular, beliefs, past programming. What the fuck does past programming mean? It doesn't mean anything. Emotions, yes, I'm going to fucking back them. Emotions, imagination. So here's the real thing. Like, people have this idea of like the unconscious mind is this black box, right? It is this absolute piece that is like, we can't think about it. It's all this, everything is happening. What the fuck is this? What does this mean? Trillions of tasks at one time. No, that's not real. Yes, there is some sense in our brain of like, we have some more or less automatic functions. And that's the important bit that I think totally breaks down. Is there such a thing as an unconscious mind? Probably. But is it what people want, like what YouTubers and like pop psych wants you to think it is? Fuck no, it's not. This is actually my area of expertise. And it's like, so I worked a lot with what we call implicit attitudes, and I'll talk about those more in a second. But a big part in like a struggle of my research was dealing with this kind of shit. Because you would go and you try to talk to people, I try to talk to students about like the conscious and unconscious stuff, and they enter with all of these pre-existing beliefs that just don't map onto reality at all. No, it's not 90% of your brain that you have yet to unlock. And let me tell you, you fucking use 100% of your brain all the time. Like this shit. I'm literally angry at this. I'm actually angry at this one. I'm just gonna drag all these iceberg memes. This is what we're doing. Your conscious mind, 0.5 to 5% of your brain. And it's like versus your subconscious mind, which just generalizes movie equals reality equals perception. What the fuck is wrong with you? Who made this? Not linear. No distinction between past, present, and future. Who the fuck wrote this? This is bullshit. This is like on-face bullshit. No, it's not a millions of scribbles. It's, give me your fucking citations! Who taught you this? Okay. This one is good. This one is actually getting at what I really want. People massively overestimate, sorry, calming down. So this one here actually has a lot of, is really hitting at the piece that I want to talk about, which is awareness. And so it's not like 95% of your brain is a thing that you don't understand or you can't introspect to. In fact, actually, there is a dramatic, like, greater amount of your brain and your actual processes that are capable and accessible to introspection. So in this case, like, they're talking about, let's see, boom, boom, boom. Who did this one? Layer 8 security, the human factor. The fuck is this, and why are they talking about conscious and unconscious processes? I don't totally disagree what they're talking about here. Like, this point about like 2 training courses not working. But their general point, let's see, can I get it to big? Thank you, Blackboard. It sounds like a megacorp for shady shit, but this is the bigger part. Preconscious, I don't believe in, but it's this idea of like conscious versus unconscious, your unconscious mind and like unknown bits. A lot of things are accessible to conscious introspection that we don't necessarily think about it. And in pop psych, people loop these things into the unconscious mind when they don't necessarily exist. Like, people talk about emotions and reactions and memories and processes. Now think about, like, yeah, maybe I don't always have to be thinking about breathing, but I can exert conscious control over my breathing, which means that those processes are not unconscious. They are accessible to conscious introspection. You are now breathing manually. You are now aware of how heavy your body is. See, all of those things that I just hit you with, those are shifting your framework from allowing your brain to do an operation more automatically to less automatically. You're now aware of how thick my ass is. Wait, you're now aware of your tongue in your mouth. See, that's the way it works. This unconscious versus unconscious versus conscious mind dichotomy doesn't map onto our experience at all. In fact, it's much easier to see that they exist in shades of gray. Certain processes can be more or less conscious, more or less automatic in the way that we think about them. Because if we were going to say, like, and this is one thing that I really didn't like. This is where it becomes very easy to find out who I really am if you don't already know it. So there's a couple things that get written about here. I wonder if, never mind, I'm not going to say anything about who I really am. But I have a lot of experience with the term implicit bias or implicit stereotyping. This was a subject of implicit social cognition. This was actually the general subject of my dissertation. Oh, Mazarine. A person I definitely don't have a personal connection to. So when we're talking about like explicit versus implicit bias or unconscious, like, people use the word unconscious bias a lot when it doesn't necessarily map onto things. So the major way that people look at this, and once again, here we are with yet another iceberg meme. See, this is the bit. That's what I get really frustrated with. We see explicit bias and implicit bias as if these are framed as like separated by a line of consciousness. And again, this doesn't necessarily work. Because the thing is, so we think about implicit bias, it's supposed to be unconscious attitudes that are able to influence your behavior. People use the term like implicit racism or unconscious racism a lot. But here's the thing though. When you think about something like the implicit association test. This is a test where you get pairs of words and photos. And what it basically says is like you're going to use the E and I on your keyboard, and it's going to flash either white faces or black faces. Some people are just manually racist, that is too, but also good and bad words. And the idea is that you will be faster or more accurate when certain things that are connected in your brain more closely are paired together versus when they're not. It's the underlying concept of this test, that a person will be, let's say if someone has, let's say, a pro-white bias, which, you know, spoilers, like 99% of people that take this test do. They will be faster and more accurate with the opposite pairing here, when European American or white American is paired with good, and African American is paired with bad, or is paired with bad. They're going to be faster and more accurate. And the thing is, when people take this test though, when we ask them questions, I mean, when researchers ask them questions afterwards about their conscious experience, what you find is that people are usually really good at determining whether or not they are doing well at this. And they know when they're having more trouble, and they know what's happening. So if this was truly an unconscious experience, they wouldn't be able to answer those questions. Right? So that's where my problem is a lot of this, like the iceberg unconscious bullshit, is that it's not that there's like conscious thoughts and unconscious thoughts. It's that they are more or less automatic, more or less accessible. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening to my TED Talk on implicit, my problem with a lot of these terms. Because people throw the word non-conscious around, but the reality is like non-conscious is oftentimes used as like a scapegoat. Like, oh, I'm having unconscious emotional reactions. And it's like, if it was really unconscious, you wouldn't be aware of it. And you wouldn't be able to introspect it. Like, that's another big thing there. And that's what I also feel, and it's like a systemic problem of the language, is that when you say something is non-conscious, it also comes off as saying, like, you're not at fault for it. I know of a researcher who did a study like that, where they framed the feedback differently. They either said it was unconscious, or it was like unconscious, or they had a different wording. And then they looked at the person, like, so they gave you a scenario and said, hey, this person took this test. They found out that they have a particular bias. And they framed it as either being like, they have like a bias or an unconscious bias. And then I think it was regardless of the experimental condition, they then acted that bias out. So they made, let's say, a discriminatory hire in their workplace while they were working in HR. And then they get to, the participant is able to answer a couple questions like, to what degree do you think that person is responsible for what they're doing? And when you framed it as unconscious, people systemically and very significantly thought that the person was less responsible for doing a racist behavior because, oh, it's unconscious. We have this idea that it's like, no, it's like unconscious means like it's not your fault or you're not responsible for it, which is not true. Because that line doesn't exist. When you take this test, you know when you're fucking up. You know when you're making more errors. It is consciously accessible. Most people can, if they sit down and they really sit with it, they can say, hey, you know what? I've grown up in this like very white supremacist culture. I've probably internalized some of that. Yeah, and that's the big thing. Unconscious in some people equals uncontrollable. And if it's uncontrollable, then you don't have to confront it. You don't have to take responsibility for it. It's like, oh, my brain's just doing brain stuff. And then you never have to take responsibility or think about it or feel bad about it. And that's where it really comes off, right? At least like that's been my orientation through things. And one of my real frustrations is that doing research on this kind of stuff, like unconscious bias and implicit bias, is that you always have to be, when you're trying to reach people and talk about the work, what you end up with is this unexpected uphill battle against this idea because of this like unconscious iceberg. Because especially when you start talking about things that make people uncomfortable, like the moment you start talking about things that make people uncomfortable, this is what you run into. Oh no, it's unconscious. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to take responsibility for that. And it's like, no, if it was unconscious, it would be uncontrollable. No, you can change. You can do it. You can change. There are steps you can take. But if you think about it as being unconscious, ergo uncontrollable, then you don't have to worry about it. And you don't have to take responsibility for it. And you don't have to think about it at all. And that's one of the biggest problems at least I found in my real life work, and one of my biggest frustrations. Because even in the literature, you'll get reviewers on your papers that will say, well, if this bias is implicit, and then in their minds, if they're not familiar with this literature, implicit equals unconscious equals uncontrollable, well then why does this paper matter? Because this problem is uncontrollable. And that's really frustrating for me. Because I'm sitting here saying, no, this doesn't work, but these shitty iceberg memes are actually like really a huge problem with trying to get people to confront things, because there's a scapegoat. You can always say, oh, it's uncontrollable, it's unconscious, it's non-conscious. When actually, even if there are unconscious thoughts, if there is such a thing as an unconscious bias, they're not racism, they're not sexism, they're not transphobia, they're not homophobia. There are things that you can deal with. Like this. Like, this is bullshit. This is fucking bullshit right here. And there's this new age fixation with psychoanalytics and neo-psychoanalytics that are just the worst. This whole thing, you could open a Psych 101 textbook. You open up a Psych 101 textbook, you tune into a fucking Vtuber, aka me, and I will tell you how much bullshit this is. But people get really enamored with this idea of like, you know, my short-term memory, my plans. This is true. This is conscious thought. This is conscious deliberation. But your long-term memory, it's not subconscious. If it was subconscious, you wouldn't be able to access it. You wouldn't be able to think about those memories. Your habits, I'm aware that I have these habits. I'm aware that I have a weird laugh and I talk about prostates on my stream. I have that understanding. Beliefs, I am aware of my beliefs. Create streams, that's bullshit. That is on-face bullshit. Where law of attraction and magnetism meet, what the fuck is that? Seed of psychic abilities. Sorry, I had to go to magic school to unlock my psychic abilities. They're not in your subconscious mind. Taps into the collective. Okay, Jung. Okay, fuck off, Carl Jung. So frustrating to see this kind of shit. Welcome to my chatting stream where I get mad about pop psych. This kind of shit was a big thing that disheartened me about pursuing academic psychology. Because so much of what we do in academic psychology is just talk to each other, but like I can put together a nurse humor and lifestyle blog, of course. And it's like, could you imagine that? This person is billing this to nurses, billing as a medical professional. Sequoia Kana would never do this. Sequoia Kana would never share this. This is actively harmful. This is actively harmful shit, and they're billing it as nurse humor. This makes me sick. And you know, we could sit there and as academic psychologists, I can talk to a room of people that are other researchers, I can do publications, I can do what have you, and I will never have the outreach of like this kind of shit, of pop psychology, because this makes people feel good. And if there's anything people want, they want to feel good about themselves. Like, oh my God. This is the part of the stream where we really get into it. Myers-Briggs personality types. People want this kind of stuff. They don't want to be told, hey, no, you can do hard work. And no, the racism you're talking about is controllable. There's hard work you can do, but important work that you can do to address these things. They want to get a tattoo that says of which letters they are. This kind of stuff is basically astrology. This kind of shit is astrology. Are you outwardly or inwardly focused? Do you prefer to take information through sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling, judging or perceiving? Oh my God, it's like, so that's the thing about pop psych, right? Is that pop psych would tell you that this is a strong tool for introspection and understanding yourself. And you know what? There's a kernel of truth there, and that's what makes it dangerous. There is a point where in some broad categories, you could understand that, hey, maybe I'm this kind of person. I tend to be this, like, I tend to have into these kinds of moods. Like, the personality is a thing that exists, but it's not fixed. It's not something that is just like an inherent category of your person. You didn't just pop out of the womb and the doctor, it's like, that's an ENFJ or that's an ENFJ right there. Yeah, and like the thing is, and this is where it gets really fucking shitty. Thank you, Kamifuji. This is where it gets dangerous, because pop psych makes people feel good. And so people, because it makes them feel good, invest some level of credibility into it that is unearned. But by taking a flawed measure and saying that this has some kind of predictive value, companies start to use this in their hiring processes. I've had this come up in job interviews. I've had people like put this on their resume. I was like, when I was in grad school, I would see applications to grad programs where people would list their Myers-Briggs type on their Vita, because they thought that it mattered, and those were the ones that I threw out the fastest. But we have this even in professional psychology. Some people believe that this is real. Now, here's the thing. I have ended up, like, I've taken the Myers-Briggs. I used to do it as like a routine. I would take it like every couple months. And you know what it's gonna be heavily influenced by? It's gonna be influenced by the time of day, by your mood, by recent experiences, all kinds of things that are situational. So it doesn't matter. It's not fixed. It's not an inherent quality of you as a person. Is it a general tool that might give you like a sense of yourself and maybe how you interact with the world? Maybe. But it's also, these categories aren't rigid. Like, I mean, shit. Think about all the VTubers you know that seem like they're very extroverted people behind a character, but are actually very shy. I'm one of them. I'm a very introverted person. I'm afraid to follow people on Twitter. But then I can get up here and I can talk about prostates. You probably think I'm kind of extroverted, don't you? Because these aren't rigid categories. They're fixed on stuff. Mercury, you're on it. Absolutely, like it's more intuitive. But this kind of shit, it feels scientific. It's like there's a truthiness to it. It feels scientific. And so companies have people in HR are making hiring decisions based on bonk bullshit. People lose jobs because of this. People get blacklisted. There was was it a podcast or a series or a documentary series recently talking about how algorithms and metrics take this kind of shit into account when it comes to hiring decisions. And so people that are totally capable of working at a job might never be considered, because when they take their big like CEO personality inventory, it says they're an ISFP and not an ENTJ like they want at the company. Like, it blows my mind as a researcher, I guess as someone who was a researcher at one point, that people believe this kind of stuff. It's so ridiculous, right? And yeah, like, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, Aqua has talked about being like an enormous, like, disaster awkward human, but she can do a solo concert. Like, there's a spectrum to human experience that doesn't fit perfectly into these categories, but people want to, because people want to feel like there's connection. And this is basically astrology, but it feels scientific. Let's find something else to be mad about. More MBTI memes. Oh god, I'm so angry about these. There's nothing else that I can really say about this. Yeah, I'm getting very deep into the number of tabs, but I really wish that this kind of shit would have stayed as a thought experiment or as a joke, once I found out that this was actually being weighted into algorithms, or even like people will do these people get paid a lot of money. So one of my friends is an IO, or industrial organizational psychologist. People and consultants get paid like 6-figure salaries to talk about the MBTI to executives and how like their personality traits, basically it's phrenology. It's fucking phrenology for personality. Like, oh, well, you know, you took this test and you're like, you're an INTJ or an ENTJ. That means you were always going to be a strong executive. And then they say, okay, if we're hiring people into our executive training program, we should screen them with these personality tests. And then someone takes it and they get like INFP, and it's like, oh, you're not cut out for executive life. You're not cut out for this job because you've got like this absolutely awful bonk pop psych exposition, and then ends up impacting people's lives, and a lot of it ends up getting sublimated into algorithms. And so then, like, if we're talking about like non-conscious as people thinking that they don't have to take responsibility for something, when you start pushing it into algorithms, that's like the next level of it, because now all of a sudden, not only do you not have to take responsibility for it, but you also don't have to deal at all with the consequences of those beliefs. Yeah, it's what it is. It's white supremacy, and in many ways, like unsurprisingly, a lot of algorithms get trained into reproducing the systems of white supremacy that they were rooted in their creation. But they do so in this way that has been sanitized and rinsed of personal accountability. There's a lot of really great stories about this with in tech, where people will find out that, let's say, for example, there was this one startup, they wanted to make a hand dryer that was supposed to, and it gives it perceived legitimacy. They wanted to make a hand dryer where they would put your hands underneath it and it would just work, right? It would just dry your hands. But what people found out once it went into wider testing, the camera they were using couldn't recognize black hands. It didn't recognize them as being there. And yet, like that's structural racism, right? Like that is systemic racism built into this, that you did not account for darker skin tones in your algorithm that's supposed to train and detect hands. But because it's been rinsed into an algorithm and laundered through technology, the systemic racism that was in charge of the creation of that algorithm somehow gets rinsed. It's no longer about personal accountability. It's like, oh, it's the algorithm. Yeah, like Twitter's image cropping algorithm routinely would chop out people of color. Just like it would, what it would do, because you train these algorithms on extraordinarily biased data sets, and then they reproduce those biases, but in a way that people don't feel bad about, because it's just the algorithm. It's the algorithm, it's uncontrollable. There's that word again, uncontrollable. We just made the algorithm, we're not responsible for what it does. Which is bullshit. It is absolute bullshit. Total horseshit. And it makes me angry. And a lot of that is rooted in that idea of conscious versus unconscious. That a person can do a thing and then can sit down and say, oh, well, I'm gonna... Blackboard, give me some Dover Syndrome music. Like, literally, it's your all responsibility. Geometry Dirt, that sounds sick. I was hoping for a chill vibe. That is not chill. That's chill. Oh, what's good, Master Who? Yeah, we're talking about systemic racism and uncontrollability and unconscious. There was a friend of mine put this really well, kind of on the same boat. It's like, not in the terms of like unconscious, but people tend to use the term... What is it? They use like... Or it's related to it. They use the term unconscious or non-conscious to mean systemic. And so what people will say is like, oh, well, that's non-conscious bias in hiring decisions, which again is like basically a euphemism for uncontrollable, aka it's not my problem. What they really mean is systemic. That there is systemic bias in hiring decisions. But if you attribute it to systems or algorithms or anything like that, it's no longer something you have to feel bad about or something you have to try to make any effort toward. And that's kind of what we've hit. Yeah, Ron, you're right. It's like we didn't used to let computers make these decisions because you can't really hold them accountable. But we've kind of now hit the same point. People just externalize their decision making to computers and then use that to shirk accountability. Yeah, it's become the primary reason why we have them do everything. We don't have to take responsibility for the harm that is caused by the status quo if we attribute the maintenance of the status quo to machines. Look, I'm just a Vtuber. Like, I'm not responsible for any of the things I say. Yeah, it was Jarv on Yeastcast was the one that brought that up, where people use the term, like, they interchangeably use systemic and non-conscious. It was a really, like, I had never thought about that, where it's like, it's the same thing, it's shirking responsibility. Which is kind of part of, like, why I get so frustrated about when people look at, like, algorithms. There was, so I know a good bit about machine learning in real life. And I was talking to one of my collaborators at one point while I was in grad school, and we were talking about the differences in approaching between, so like, what is machine learning, right? So machine learning is basically, you know, when you train an algorithm and it learns things, and it learns stuff. But this is how we think about it. This is genuinely a visualization. These are always really, I think, good ways to think about how we attribute stuff. The machine learning is like this brilliant creation of AI. No, machine learning is non-theory driven statistics. So we train these algorithms on the existing data set. But the data set, so let's say, for example, we've got this. This is the visual we're going with. This is what people think it is when it's like, oh, we use some machine learning to train an algorithm to make hiring decisions. Well, what it does is it looks at the status quo and it looks at probabilities and rates and computes models based on that without accounting for other background information. There's no theory driving it. Yeah, there's no learning in machine learning. There's no intelligence in this type of artificial intelligence. There's no critical evaluation. So if you train, let's say, again, executive hiring, if you train this machine learning algorithm on the body of existing people and existing executives, it's going to disproportionately tell you to hire men that are from certain schools, that have wealthy upbringings, etc. And then people will say that it's not racist. It's not racist, it's not classist, it's not sexist, it's not ableist, it's not whatever. But it totally is. It literally is. You've just laundered the existing problems of the status quo and said it's fine because now it's a machine doing it. And this is where like the MBTI stuff comes in. And it's like you feed this algorithm bonk data. That it's like, oh, well, you should select for people that have a certain personality type. And it's like, somehow people say it's not a bad thing because they think that this is what it looks like. But really, you could erase this whole chalkboard on the back and just write racism. Like, you put bonk information into a machine learning, into an algorithm, and you're going to get bonk outcomes. But because there's now now a process involved, people think it's legitimate. So a friend of mine did a work, like a process. So like basically, like one of the jokes that we have, so I'm a statistician predominantly. I would say I'm a statistician more than I'm a psychologist. And that's exactly it. It's like what it does is it runs these models millions of times until it finds one that fits the data well. There's no underlying theory or context or critical examination. It just runs the numbers a million times until it finds the best solution that it can out of it. And then people just like are like, well, whatever. So like I said, I work a lot with I guess like the term implicit bias is what people use the term for. So one of my collaborators did a collaboration with this machine learning lab and they were going to, I love you. And they were going to do a study looking at social media profiles predicting implicit racial bias. And what they found was there was one word that was the single biggest predictor of implicit racial bias. You know what it was? Beltway, aka Interstate 495 around Washington, D.C. This is the New York Beltway. That's the Baltimore Beltway. Here we go. Oh, this is Atlanta. What the heck? Why is this? Beltway. So here's the thing. So they reached this point. The algorithm spat out and said, tweeting or putting the word Beltway is the biggest predictor of implicit racial bias. So what does this mean substantively? Yeah, it's all smoke and mirrors for concepts we all very understand. Well, the computer scientists in the room all slapped their hands and were like, aha, we did it. We solved the problem. But then my collaborator, who is a psychologist and has a stronger background in theory and wanting to understand the why, wanted to go that extra step and was like, all we've done is built an algorithm that says that's just a proxy for living in Washington, D.C. Like, that's what we've really done here. But the computer scientists were like, we solved it. Like, there's a correlation between racial bias and this, and like, which is just not real. It's all made up. So that's my, that's what I always think about the anecdote when I think about machine learning and computer science and like all this, because like it's all bottom up. You just train a data set and like we don't think about anything. And yeah, it's like you just like, you have people that are taking data sets that they already don't fully understand and then training algorithms that rinse and launder their lack of understanding and make it seem like into expertise. So they don't understand the actual process and they don't understand what they're doing in the background. And yet then they end up with this bit and yeah, it's frustrating. Okay, this is actually really good. Like, this is not what machine learning is. Yeah, it's like they have discovered that what they found is a correlation. And that's really what machine learning can only ever find. It can only ever find correlation. And you know, what do we know, class? Correlation does not imply causation. Correlation is not causation. There's so many fucking memes about this, but machine learning tends to it's like, oh, well, we found the co-occurrence of these things in the data set, but they don't understand that there are issues. So when you train a data set on on an existing workforce to build a data set or a algorithm that is being trained on a data set that was created by racially biased hiring, what you end up finding is spurious correlations without understanding the systemic problems between them, and then you end up with an algorithm that is now reproducing those circumstances without critical examination. And it sucks! It makes me so mad! Ugh. Ah. And when you launder it through algorithms, like exactly like Rowan just said, it's like there's not even an attempt to find the why behind it. Like, why would you find the why? Why would you look for that? And it's like, if you put in the algorithm, like, well, the algorithm said it. So it's like why would you don't need to go any further? You don't need to look deeper. You don't need to think about it more. It's really frustrating. Like, it's just really, really frustrating. Well, this was a great conversation that kicked off from me wanting to talk about learning fighting games and turned into me giving you all lectures on machine learning, correlation and causation, and systemic racism. Welcome to my VTuber career. This is what it looks like. Yeah, we got here through the unconscious thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can trace the steps. Like, we got to unconscious, then we got into implicit bias, then we got into people not taking accountability for things, then we got into algorithms, and then we got into MBTI stuff, right? And personality psych, and how people really want to believe that. And that turned into also like algorithms and how people use MBTI stuff to like make decisions because they think that these things actually matter. And then that turned into machine learning and everything. Yeah, it's all selling snake oil. But you know who would never sell you snake oil? VTubers.